Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast where writers sit around, drink tasty beverages, and talk about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. There will be rants and raves and opinions that will not agree but are lovingly delivered. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. Today's writing brunch is David Welsh and me, Jeannie Warner. This is episode 177, interview with Dr. Alan Wu. Welcome, Dr. Wu. May I call you Alan?
Yes, and thank you, Jeannie and David, for hosting me today.
We're so delighted. You kind of fit in brilliantly with my desire to say it is every writer's dream, if they are a right-thinking, good writer, to actually be as accurate as possible in all the aspects of their book. For instance, Dave threw a story of mine across the room once when I referred to a gun having a safety that did not have a safety. My friend won't watch Boston Legal Who's a Lawyer because it's a Boston Legal. So the fact that you both write forensic procedurals and run a lab, this is amazing. You have produced a wonderful body of work for writers. Plus, I love that you've started writing it as science fiction yourself.
Well, yes, I have been writing scientific and medical reports for the better part of 40 years. These are not geared towards the lay public, so there's a lot of technical jargon. But then I felt that there was more and had a flair for writing to the more general public and sort of just passing on some of the experiences that I've had in science and medicine.
Well, I actually really loved it. I was walking through in some of your titles, Microbiology, What You Don't Know Will Kill You, and The Hidden Assassin When Clinical Lab Tests Go Awry. I haven't bought that one yet, but it's on my list. Tell me, there's one on toxicology. Tell me how you collected all of these pieces together to decide what are you going to clump together in a work?
Well, I have, as part of what we do, write case reports that are unusual findings or unusual outcomes of patients, again, designed for medical audiences, colleagues of mine, both in medicine and in pathology and laboratory medicine. And that is sort of the fodder for the stories that I write to the general public. There's obviously some differences that need to be made, not above and beyond the obvious one that most people won't understand some of the medical terminology, which is presumed in medical writing. But the other part is that I need to be mindful of privacy laws. And since these are based on real stories and real patients, I want to make sure that the real people who may still be around, or at least their family members, don't come back to me and saying, you're disclosing public information or you're disclosing publicly private information about my family. So I've had to fictionalize, but at the same time, I think that gives me a little bit of literary freedom to embellish to some extent while still keeping the science and medicine as accurate as possible.
So you're kind of the laboratory medical equivalent of Oliver Sacks, if you're familiar with his works. Sounds like you're doing a similar thing.
Yeah, very much so. And I think I'm sort of an N equals one because there's not a lot of us in my profession who have this desire or has this vocation to do that. And so for me, it has been a lot of fun.
I was thinking about it, and I'm sure this probably makes you cringe because when House first came out, the idea that they actually used real case files, they introduced an entire world to the idea of what vasculitis, sarcoidosis, et cetera, were. And as it happens, I have a friend down in Australia, hi Craig, who has both of those things and writes about it constantly on social media. But that made it interesting, and I think it may have actually gotten people to want to go to medical school, but there's a downside of it, right? I mean, you're probably going to tell me something like how the lab technique isn't right or something crazy.
House is a wonderful show, and it is sort of the model for some of my stories in that the objective here is to make a diagnosis, and it could be something unusual, or it could be something that is typical but might have a twist to it. That's all good, and it has done a lot of good in making the public aware of the kinds of things that could happen and the kinds of problems that people face. My only objection is the portrayal of the laboratory information. Dr. House comes to the lab, might pull up a microscope slide, look at it, and has a aha medical moment. And that's really what does not happen in real life.
Right.
Are you saying that XKCD comic is more true to life, that they say, we're going to look at it for 3 hours and say it may or may not have barium in it?
And to some extent, it diminishes our real contributions. Not that I'm looking to have people send me accolades, but in the real public, it may be a demand of their caregivers that they're unable to deliver, that really medical information is delivered by medical laboratory professionals, and they do the lion's share of the background work, and then the physician takes that information and makes their medical conclusions. So it's all part of the team, but we're an integral part that is unrecognized.
I feel strongly that this is true. I mean, I have a soapbox that I won't mount too firmly here on women's health and how the cross diagnosis is, but there's part of me that hopes that somebody would look at endocrine systems and changing endocrine systems with brain chemistry, and why do more white guys want to kill themselves after age 40 versus why do more women have this problem, and then their brain changes, and it's all connected. And I believe that lab medicine and some of the writing you've done shows the interconnectedness of the whole system. So treating them like a holistic human, not just, well, they were addicted to drugs. Well, why were they addicted to drugs? What were the underlying things that, like, for instance, your Elvis story? Maybe Elvis wasn't just a loser who did drugs. Maybe instead Elvis was dealing with pain, and Elvis was dealing with medical conditions that ran undiagnosed. And it's neat what you did.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that you get the objective. The objective is that my profession is highly investigational in nature, has a lot of tools that are put to bear to in this case, medical problems, and that a lot of the things that we're able to do in medicine could not have been done without us. That is not to diminish the roles of physicians and nurses who are making the decisions and caring for these patients, but the science behind that is also important.
Absolutely. It almost worries me how seldom, and this is, we don't want to get on a rant or soapbox about the insurance companies, et cetera, but it strikes me that many people might actually have benefited in their life by having more tests ordered by their doctors rather than fewer.
So long as the tests are done correctly and the tests that are ordered are interpreted correctly. So part of what I write, and it's some of the reasons that the titles of my stories are a little cryptic, is that I deal with a sort of a unwritten law here, and that is nobody wants to talk about medical errors, which account for the third leading cause of death in the United States after cancer and heart disease. And we're all humans and we make mistakes, except that when doctors make mistakes, people's lives are affected. When the laboratory makes mistakes, people's lives are influenced. So there is certainly a higher bar. And part of what I write is to alert the public that information can be flawed and that we need to continuously improve. And here are the reasons. Here are some of the things that didn't go well for one reason or another.
I think that is very noble. Much in the way that we have learned policing in the world on TV is presented a certain way as they do everything right. But Dave and I witnessed a murder once, and I can tell you that Dave got frisked, twice, Dave?
Yeah.
I didn't get
Jeannie was standing there with a bag that could have held a small car in it, and they just like glanced at her.
my hands around the corpse's neck. Let's not forget when they walked up.
Well, you were looking for a pulse, but they didn't know that.
Exactly. All they knew is I had my hands around the neck of somebody and he's lying on the ground and I'm over them, etc. And
but I'm a male wearing a leather jacket, so yeah, frisk him. He might have a gun.
They asked me if I had a weapon, and then they started doing other things, and I was confused that none of them were actually administering first aid to this man lying here, since I think I felt his last heartbeat. And I'm like, and I started ordering them around. Now later, I put it into a book, and my group of readers said, that's not a realistic scene. And I'm like, but I wrote it exactly the way it happened. And they brought up that television and movies have convinced people that every people do all of the right things at all of the right times. So you're pointing out, I mean, you're almost saying that Bones is a lie, that all of that lab and forensic investigation, that it can actually go wrong sometimes. But this is how you know, and this is how you find out.
That doesn't make good drama, and it doesn't make the protagonists on the series look good. So, I
think it could, though.
Well, unfortunately, when I give lectures about what I'm trying to do to professional groups, I get criticized because nobody wants to say that we're fallible. Nobody wants to admit that mistakes happen. And I think there's also some protection, cover your ass type of attitude that we don't want to be the focus of any type of medical malpractice. Yeah. So I kind of spin it the other way. And that is that so much of what we do in the lab contributes to the medical decisions that are ultimately made. And that in the past, particularly my generation, there's just a universal acceptance that your doctor knows best about what should be done with you. And I think that the next generation, or even the one beyond the next, will have the attitude that, no, I'm going to go on the internet. I'm going to find out what these tests mean. I'm going to go to WebMD or some credible site to understand the reasons why certain tests are ordered and what the interpretations of those tests are, and so to take a little bit of responsibility for the medical decisions that are being made. Not to say that we want you to play doctor, but to at least have cogent conversations with your provider about what it is that you're doing, right, instead of just accepting at face value.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I frame it a lot of times as knowing which questions to ask, because I'll start looking at something and I have enough wrong with me that I have to go to the doctor and ask questions or find out what's wrong. And
I wasn't going to say
like
that.
You say,
what is wrong with you, man?
We don't have long enough. So, but yeah, I mean, so in having a conversation with my doctors, I have encountered doctors who had an agenda. I took a drug for a while that didn't seem to do me any good, but I was on it for longer than I probably should have been because I'm convinced of this. I mean, I never asked, but the way they pushed it seemed like, and it was an expensive medication. So the way they pushed it seemed like, okay, well, they're getting a kickback or it's to their advantage to prescribe this to me, even if it's not working. And, that kind of, and I'm, like Jeannie says, she has similar experiences in different ways, but those kinds of experiences kind of, at least to me, convinced me that, yeah, you need to be a part of the conversation. You need to be kind of directing your own healthcare to some degree.
But your approach here of adding a little bit of fictionalization, even I'm not going to call it magic. I'm going to call it science that I don't understand. In terms of a fellow Yuku can telepathy, and this is in I think it's your latest book, Mind Portal.
Well, it's my science fiction book. Yes, that's a departure from the others.
It is. It basically says, all right, if I can project something to make somebody think something different, how can I change their their early end? Like, and, Elvis being, wonderful, but I liked the lady who was involved with the EPA. I knew her name, but I read it, I didn't realize what could she have done if she had lived? And similarly, we chatted with episode 137. Laura Frankos wrote a book called Broadway Revival, where a man goes back in time physically with modern medicines to save the lives of Gershwin and other Broadway writers who died early from, heart disease and cancer.
Wow. Well, I think that's kind of one of the key points is the science fiction part of it, or at least that science fiction part of it, affecting people's minds telepathically in the past is a device, just like the time travel is to play what if, and so the real interesting part of these stories, or at least the biggest, most interesting part to me, is the medical what if. I mean, the rest of it's just a vehicle for getting there.
And maybe it's also what testing they didn't have in the 40s that could have fixed this, or the 60s.
Well, right, but that's part of the medical part of it. That's nothing to do with being able to affect somebody's mind, right? That's just a plot device. To my mind, Alan, if there's something more to it than that I'm missing, let me know.
Well, there is an underlying mission for me writing any of these stories, and that is to promote what we do. And the reason that I think it's important is the federal government has enacted legislation in 2019 as part of the Healthcare Reform Act to reduce laboratory reimbursements across the board for outpatients at the tune of 20%, with the next round being scheduled for next year. And so as I enter my senior years, I am hoping that the level of laboratory and medical care that I've been able to provide will be there for me. And I'm fearful that the answer is that it's not going to be there for me, that the advancements that I've been a part of throughout my career will be more difficult to achieve. There's so much more yet we have to do. And if we continue to lose funding, then those things are not going to happen. So that is actually my ultimate goal. Now, Mind Portal is sort of a sidetrack. It's not the major reason I write these stories, but I'm hoping that as you read them, you come to appreciate, it didn't happen in King Henry VIII's time, or it didn't happen with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but we have laboratory tests that could have changed the outcome of these people, and perhaps we should be continuing to invest so that the next generation of leaders will benefit from it. And that's not going to happen if we continue to have these legislative cuts.
I liked that. I also, you added the personal bits of it that I really enjoyed, not just the toxicology, the little bit of genetic disease, the chemistry tests. You put that together in a way that said, again, the all relatedness of all things, that if somebody maybe was depressed, or maybe they were in pain, or maybe they were self-medicating, of all of the different ways that people have treated how they feel on a daily basis, what could have been discovered with the right tests. And maybe in looking back and saying, wow, okay, maybe we would lose fewer people to drug overdoses if they actually got the right kind of medical care and testing. That's a very, very powerful message.
Well, thank you. It's not such a direct message through the front door. It's really from the side door or the back door. But
I thought it was a baseball bat. It was beautiful for me. But I'm wondering why everybody over the age of 50 is not involved in one or the other medical studies, because, hey, we're 50. We don't study aging in our country, and I sure wish we did.
Again, we are entering those years where we're going to demand the kinds of things that, and rightfully so.
Well, and we also have, let's face it, we have a little bit more legislative power than some of the kids do, because we've written more. Like, there was 4 years ago, I had many of writer friends in the science fiction fantasy world were saying, well, what can I do about politics? And I'm like, you can write. Do you not remember when a woman stood up in front of the Arizona legislation and filibustered for a 24, 36 straight hours. And part of that was by reading letters that people had written to her about real life people affected by the legislation being mentioned. So if any of these things affect us, people, I want to say out there, even if you don't think of yourself as a writer, be a writer, use a whole lot of words and say, this diminishment of funding that you give to the National Institute of Health affects me because, and then write it out. And why matters. And you have given a beautiful set of whys out here.
So I'm also fearful for another thing that perhaps it's a little sidebar, but people tell me, the young people of our country don't read anymore. They just look at YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, and is that the kind of generation we're going to be seeing?
I think actually that's not 100% correct. Where they find things to read are different. But for instance, I have a friend who said, yes, they do stumble upon and Tumblr. Like, these are not sites that I am. The demographic is younger, but that's where they get together and talk. Oh, what are you reading? Well, I'm reading this. And so I think what happens is those of us that are dinosaurs are still on the dinosaur sites. And we are not necessarily reaching out into those to say, hey, and here's a book, here's a story of this. I mean, you could literally, and I may try to talk you into this, read one of your stories aloud as an episode and just record it and put it out there on an Instagram or a TikTok if necessary, or if TikTok's not legal where you are in the world, people, whatever, YouTube, throw something out there and say, I did this. Here's a recording of me talking, and this is why it's interesting.
I think that the internet and all the dumbing down of media and so forth does have an effect, but the real issue in my mind is education. I think education has come to be less valued than it used to be in our society and maybe even worldwide in general.
Because it's 10 times as expensive as when you and I went to school, Dave.
Well,
have you seen CU's register?
Well, yeah, you can argue cause and effect there too. Would education, anyway, that's another rabbit hole. But
let me pull it out and go in a different direction then, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Alan,
I said the E word. That's good. That's good enough for me for now.
Okay. It looks like you've been deep into the coronavirus research and investigations in the past few years. I saw that you had a number of interviews and things that were recorded for those of you who like things that are visual, stimulating. Have you?
That's it. Encourage them. Go ahead.
I'm going to encourage him.
Anyway,
it looks like you've been involved with it a lot. What have you learned about people and audience and coronavirus and understandings and lack of understandings? I mean, there's a narrative, whether we like it or not, that has been exploited on every which way but Sunday. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this whole pandemic has been an eye-opener, not because of the impact that it's had on everybody's lives and health and the death rates, but the degree of misinformation and the extent by which concepts have been politicized is really frustrating to me. I live in a pretty black and white world of evidence that if it's not documented in a good clinical trial, then I don't pay attention to it. But so much of the information that we get is not evidence-based. It's not rigored in scientific doctrines, and yet it's out there, and so many people are influenced by it, and so much of it is motivated by the wrong reason. So this is very disturbing to me. I don't think that it's going to change, however, because we live in a politically polarized environment that's just getting more and more separated.
Yeah, and to tie that back to something you were talking about, that kind of attitude, those kinds of attitudes, when they take hold, can and do lead to cutting funding for research and stuff like that. So, I mean, we were unprepared for this pandemic, but we're supposed to be learning lessons from this one and taking those forward to prepare for the next one. And in a lot of cases, that's just not happening.
I think it was,
A lot of finger pointing, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah.
well, it didn't help it when I think he did have a PhD. I'm going to call him ivermectin boy because I don't want to remember his name. But that he was involved with some of the mRNA research, and then he went out and kind of went crazy sideways for making money, and that hurts me in my hurty place a little bit.
Some of my colleagues as well, who I thought were very much rooted in evidence, have sort of gone off on their own to make undocumented opinions. And I question their motivations. Not always clear. You know, if it's making money, I've seen that, but that's not always the case.
Yeah. And well, we can't fix other people, but we can say whenever you want, I want to say whenever you go out there and read an article that says trimming your fingernails will help save your eyesight, keep in mind that it better have links and keep clicking through the articles until you get to the original study. And if you don't understand it, go ask your doctor. Is that fair to say?
I think so. I think that it's likely that the clergy and the medical profession are less tainted by politics than perhaps other walks of life.
One can hope under many circumstances. Yeah. So,
are you familiar with? I'm going to take a little bit of a tangent here, but somebody who's doing work that this conversation reminded me of. So there you go. Are you familiar with your local epidemiologist? And I'm blanking on the name of that's a woman who's an epidemiologist, and she writes this newsletter. And she started during COVID, and it was all about COVID, but she's branched out since to talk about other epidemiology subjects. Caitlin, something maybe I'll put it in the program notes, but is this something that you're familiar with, or is this new?
No, I don't know this person.
Oh, okay. But anyway, I mean, it sounds like her mission is much the same. She does a good job of explaining epidemiology and looking at from an evidence-based perspective without dumbing it down too much. She actually puts like the original charts from studies and stuff into her newsletter if they're relevant.
I honestly think that there are places that social media can help. For instance, there was a doctor that was talking about why masks actually work. And for the people that it says, well, I'm wearing a mask, why can I swear, but I can still smell farts. And I spent the whole day laughing about how farts are measured in Daltons as opposed to the different size differential. And now the fact that I just simply know without even thinking about it, how large a fart molecule is makes me tremendously happy. And because all of the world is fart jokes, there's a long way that really complex, medically interesting things can be rendered interesting to the reader. And I love that you do that through Mind Portal, is you do make it a bit forensic investigation, but there's a little bit of funny, there's a little bit of humanity in it. You can laugh at yourself, laugh at them and say, oh, I see parallels with other people in that. And that's what I really loved about your book there.
Again, thank you. I don't want it to be so dry that nobody will ever read chapter 2. And I think that you got some of my, at times, bathroom humor.
I did, actually. That was one of the things I really appreciated about it. Now, I understand, did you tell me that you were working with some screenwriters and producers to possibly get work into television series? I mean, I don't know if you'd be the core writer, because we have learned from other people we've interviewed that usually on a television series, there's a whole team of writers. But in terms of crime scene investigation, what's our future vision of Dr. Wu here? Yeah,
so it is just that. It is a show pattern after CSI, which used science to solve science to solve crime. I want to say that we're using science to solve medical mysteries. Before CSI, all the crime shows were about cops and detectives and some lawyers, and now it's about the science. Today, all the medical shows are about doctors and nurses, and I want my show to center around the clinical laboratory using doctors and nurses to enact the science that we create, just like CSI has policemen and detectives who use the information that the crime scene investigators provide. And in that way, this will highlight the importance of what we do. Just like today, the crime scene investigators are now valued. The things that happened during the OJ trial, in terms of the handling of evidence, in my mind, greatly favored the defendants. Without stating my view of guilt or innocence, just the fact that the evidence was so botched prior to the onset of that television show was a major determinant.
Yeah.
Today, that wouldn't happen. Today, we have invested in crime scene investigators and laboratories. Jurists have a much higher bar of understanding of science as they reach verdicts. And this is the kind of buzz that I need to create for clinical laboratories, that patients, not victims as in CSI, but patients will understand what it is that we're doing.
With the caveat that they have sometimes unrealistic expectations about what those laboratories can do, but it sounds like you're saying that overall the effect has been positive.
I don't know. I'm now imagining a scenario, if not like Justified, but maybe like Justify. Let's say there's a well-off, well-established toxicologist, lab technician, such as, I don't know, somebody named Dr. Wu, who really pissed somebody off, and the only position that he got was in Kentucky that wanted to take him there. So he had to make friends with a local, policeman, investigating public defender in order to start getting lab work applied to actual crimes for the first time. So it would be frustrating, but there are areas that don't have access to these facilities or the knowledge or experience. I mean, we do not have equality across all of our states. So this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's certainly true.
I'm just saying that people that assume that all medical clinics can handle all issues that come their way, that's kind of a lie. So, the traveling Dr. Wu going town to town in the South to just educate public defenders on what can be available there could be a super interesting idea too.
Very good. I hadn't thought of that.
I mean, because in the end, it's not the DA, it's the public defenders that are talking to people that are getting, shall we use the term, railroaded in one way or another. So,
well, there's a lot of vested interests that want to keep good science out of various areas. We've already talked about that a little bit, right? But
no, I think it's what I could say. It was just yet another idea of for those of you outdoors who want to write such a thing. Dr. Wu, do you also consult? Can somebody reach out to you and say, "Can you look at this and tell me if it's real?" Or would there be too much of your time spent doing that? Saying no, hell no, maybe.
No, I would be happy to talk to anybody who has an issue that they want to bring up that they think that I might have some knowledge about, some contributions that could be made. I welcome that.
Wonderful. Well, I will would be delighted to put the links to the fascinating things we've discussed, along with how somebody might reach out to you asking a question like, okay, I want to have a bullet that pierces this, but we don't know that until later. What would the symptoms be? That kind of thing. You could help him out?
Well, if it's related to how a laboratory can solve that question, then yes.
Exactly, because the steps are interesting.
If it comes down to, what drug should I take, or should I have this surgery or that surgery, that I have to leave to the attending physicians for sure.
No, this is pure interesting discovery and testing of what exists and what chemically may be related to other things.
For writing speculative fiction.
So again, we will put links on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today, Alan. This is fantastic.
Well, I enjoyed our talk. I guess you never know where the direction of the discussion will go. And I certainly enjoyed having that dialogue today.
Especially on our show, just saying.
Well, and I will put links to your website and where they can buy your fascinating and interesting books. So people who are doing your research, do your research right, so that one day, what if Alan's reading one of your books and says, that's not how it is, and needs to shout at you? Try to get it right the first time by having good reference materials, right?
Everybody wants truth.
Truth is beautiful. You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web support magic is by Deirdre Schween, and our sound engineers and backup web spiders are Dave Welsh and John Schmidt. Our intro and exit music are both performed by Michael Engberg. You can hear more from Michael Engberg on manyhatsmusic.com. Our podcast today is sponsored by Jackal Design, The Bean Scene, Arm Street, and honorable mention to the NIH for funding research labs all over the U.S. And hey, thanks for listening.